It's summer break, folks. It's summer break. Look at all the people in this little room with a little window to hear about Taiwan. I'm Eric Schlussel. I'm an associate professor of history and international affairs here at the George Washington University. And I have the great honor of being the director of the Gaston Sigur Center for Asian Studies, which is not only one of the top 10 Asian studies centers in the United States, it is by far the largest and most active in the Washington, D.C. area. Thank you, yes. Little positive energy. And we're very, very proud to have a very active and, as you can see, pretty popular Taiwan program here. We put on a number of these events every year, and they always seem to be quite successful. We always seem to fill this room. So I just want to take a second to thank a number of people, including Richard Haddock, my assistant director, who plays a pivotal role in putting these together, and especially this event. I want to thank program coordinators Adam Bubinich, and Bobby Kincaid, who's out there somewhere, and also to Dr. Lisa Lackney, who's out there, who runs our East Asia National Resource Center. Everybody here has played a pivotal role in making this event happen today. So thank you to everyone. Yes, and so consequently, as DC's favorite home of Taiwan studies, we are especially glad to be hosting members of the U.S.-Taiwan Next Generation Working Group who are here in town for a series of talks on their current research and what we need to know about Taiwan in this present moment. On that note, I will turn things over to Tom Gold. Let me introduce him first. Tom Gold is someone who, if you've been to the China field, you'll know that name. Tom Gold is professor of the graduate school at the University of California, Berkeley. He's professor emeritus. He taught there in the sociology department from 1981 until 2018. From 2000 until 2016, and this is what he puts on all his bios, he is the executive director of the Inter-University Program for Chinese Language Studies. If you've ever heard of IUP, if you've ever been to the China field, you'll know IUP because this is the consortium of universities in North America that administers most important Chinese language study abroad program out there. It's housed at Tsinghua University in Beijing. So he was also the Associate Dean of International and Area Studies and chair of the Center for Chinese Studies at Berkeley. And currently he's a senior advisor of UC Berkeley's U.S.-Taiwan Next Generation Working Group, in which capacity he is here today. Professor Gold's research is extensive and covers decades, so I'll keep it short. It focuses mainly on many aspects of the societies of East Asia, particularly mainland China and Taiwan. In the largest sense, he writes, he examines the process of the emergence of the increasingly empowered and autonomous individual and a private sphere in societies that have combined traditional and modern forms of authoritarian rule. He explores this from many angles: private business, entrepreneurship, personal relations, the famous guanxi of Chinese and Sinophone culture, popular culture, youth and the life course, non-governmental organizations, and civil society. I had the great opportunity of meeting Tom earlier during one of the programs associated with the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. Now, his book from 1986, State and Society of the Taiwan Miracle, is a standard work in the field and have pioneered applying theories of dependent developments and world systems to Asia. And he's been studying and teaching and mentoring ever since. Let me welcome to the podium, Tom Gold. Also, a quick announcement, if you're reserving a seat with your bag, please remove your bag from that seat, because as you can see, we're getting quite full. Thank you very much. Tom Gold.
Thank you, Eric. I certainly hadn't expected such an introduction when all I'm doing is kicking off the panel, but thank you very much. I'd forgotten that I put all of that verbiage. Some of it's true. Some of it's true. Yeah, so I'm really very happy, very excited to be here today to kick off this. I'm sure it's going to be extremely interesting panel on Taiwan, led by members of the second cohort of the Next Generation Taiwan Working Group. This working group is a joint project between the Institute of East Asian Studies at Berkeley and the TICO, Taipei Economic and Cultural Office of San Francisco. And our goal is to bring together not just academics, but people from various walks of life who one way or another use Taiwan or have relations with Taiwan in their professional careers. So you'll hear we have a very good representative of people from different different walks of life, different areas of expertise to meet with you today. We've selected 2 cohorts of approximately 10 people each, and they've met in Berkeley, met in Taipei, and then this is the final meeting in Washington. And we've gone to a number of different government and nonprofit and private and other sorts of organizations to understand their relationship with Taiwan and how they've established relations and how they carry them out. Part of our mission is to build a sense of community among people who have an interest in Taiwan and a professional working relationship with Taiwan, so that they can learn from each other and also know who to contact for questions that they have or for guanxi that they need in their own work. So that's just a brief introduction to the program. We're hoping, I see a number of people of appropriate age around the room. We're hoping to get funding for a 3rd cohort. So keep your eyes open, and the opportunity hopefully will exist for you to apply to join this program in the next couple of years. So am I moderating? Am I introducing?
Oh, I can.
Oh, Ricky, so let me also. You just pulled me away from lunch and said you're running this program. So, but let me add my thanks to Eric's, to Richard, who's a member of the 1st cohort and has been a dynamic force in setting up this program overall and in arranging for today's seminar. So thank you again, Richard, and take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, Eric and Tom, for getting us started here today. Thank you, everyone, for attending our panel today on asking and assessing, well, what's next for Taiwan? Just a couple months ago, we hosted a conference looking at the current Trump administration's first 100 days and its implications and impacts on U.S.-Taiwan as well as cross-strait relations. This conversation is in some ways a follow-up to that conference, still addressing some of these very salient impression issues regarding U.S.-Taiwan relations and Taiwan policy more generally. So my name is Richard Haddock. I'm Assistant Director at the Sigur Center for Asian Studies, as well as co-director of our Taiwan Education and Research Program, where in addition to hosting events like this, we put together various activities focused on Taiwan affairs, from scholarships to classes to student professional development opportunities. And if you're interested in Taiwan affairs and in the DC area, please be sure to follow us on social media platforms and attend more discussions like this one today. So I'm first going to introduce our panel of speakers, and then I will kind of go over this event format. It's a little bit different than our traditional panel discussions, and I'll go over that in just a moment. But first, to introduce our panel, we have Dr. Raymond Guo, who's the inaugural director of the Taiwan Policy Initiative and a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. He specializes in international security, international order, and East Asia. He is the author of 2 books, and his work has been published in International Security, the Journal of Conflict Resolution, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and War on the Rocks. He holds a PhD from Princeton University and has previously worked for Fordham University, the United Nations, the National Democratic Institute, and the Democratic Progressive Party of Taiwan. Next, we have Professor Rosalie Chen, who is currently an assistant professor of psychology at Dominican University of California. Her research interests are interdisciplinary in nature and lie at the intersection of social psychology, political science, and culture. She studies ideology in the East Asian cultural context, national identity issues in cross-strait relations, and the role of culture-specific emotions at the group level in motivating international conflict. She's particularly interested in exploring international relations from angles of political psychology and culture. Previously, Professor Chen taught at Colgate University before joining DUC. She received her BS from Truman State University, MA from our very own George Washington University at the Elliott School, and PhD from National Taiwan University. Always love welcoming our fellow members of the GW community back. Next, we have Dr. Gary Sampson, who is an independent national security strategist and recently retired U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence and International Affairs Officer. He specializes in East Asian security, alliance politics, and U.S.-China dynamics. His work has been published by Studies in Intelligence, Military Review, The Strategy Bridge, and CSIS. He holds a PhD in international relations from Tufts University's Fletcher School and studied in Taiwan as an Olmsted Scholar at National Sun Yat-sen University. He previously held policy roles on the Joint Staff, in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and at Headquarters Marine Corps. Lastly, we have Adrian Shifang Wu, who is Program Manager at the Global Taiwan Institute just down the road, and the host and producer of Taiwan Salon. Highly recommend this podcast if you don't already listen to it. GTI's Cultural and Soft Power podcast. She's a member of our very own, the UC Berkeley US Taiwan Next Generation Working Group, which all of our panelists here are members of, and a member of the Foreign Policy for America's Next Gen Initiative. Additionally, she was a 2024 Taiwan-US Policy Program Delegate, previously a Taiwan Delegate for Straight Talk 2023 here at George Washington University, and she's currently a Straight Talk facilitator in training. Before joining GTI, she graduated from Ritsumeikan University and Kyunghee University with a dual master's degree in international relations. She spent 7 years living in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan, including 3 years of teaching English in Japan and Taiwan during a year of study at Waseda University, while pursuing her BA in Honors in East Asian Studies from McGill University. So we really have an all-star panel here that is, I think, indicative of what the Next Gen Working Group aspires to bring together different disciplines, all with interests in Taiwan. So today's panel discussion is somewhat more of a round robin of question and answer, because we want some dynamic responses to what are some of the most pressing issues for US-Taiwan relations. So I've asked our panelists to prepare an opening statement of what each of them see as one of the most urgent issues related to US-Taiwan relations. And from there, we will just open the floor to questions with the audience, and I might have a question or two myself. But this way, we want to have a dynamic conversation with our audience today, since this is in some way a moving target of an issue, and we want to hear from different perspectives, different angles about this particular question. So Raymond, I'll start off with you, and please, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming, and thank you again to GW, and especially to Richard for hosting us here at this wonderful event. Can everyone hear me okay? Oh, okay, sure. So starting off with disclaimers, this is just me speaking my private capacity. Thank you. Speaking my private capacity does not represent a position taken by RAND or any of RAND's sponsors through the Department of Defense and the Department of Security. So I think hopefully trying to publish this in an actual op-ed form. So we'll see how this goes. Any feedback would be more than welcome. I think right now we are seeing what I consider to be a problematic yet easy assumption. We often see this associated with, say, unilateralism or, say, restraint approaches to foreign policy, which are a little bit in vogue right now. And it's the idea that if the US does something, everybody else just pretty much just has to take it. The US can pull back and others will step in. They have no choice but other than to maintain their previous policy positions, which favor the United States anyway. The strong do what they can, principally because the weak have to suffer. And so as a result, the US, even in pulling back from, say, political engagements or security commitments to, say, Ukraine, Taiwan, NATO, or in economic engagements like adherence to the WTO system that we actually, we obviously helped start. We can pull back from that. Everyone else will pretty much do the same thing and recognize our military, security, economic leadership. We get all the benefits of primacy with none of the drawbacks / costs. Now, the challenge with this is that in most cases, if it's the Washington trying to turn the screws on Papua New Guinea, they probably would be correct, because the architecture of the international system of the international order constrains the choices that other states have. There's enough belief in the principles or dynamics of free economic exchange, political exchange, that countries really do actually want to stay in the system. It would only take, I think, one of my mentors, John Eikenberry, wrote, it would take a foolish, if not reckless, US president to turn their back on the economic benefits, the benefits the international system has given us. And then we turn to the Trump tariffs, right? This is a shotgun blast at everybody based on, I do a lot of math, and I'm like, I have no idea what that equation is. And we're seeing a much different response than this sort of everyone coming in with on bended knee. Instead, we're seeing Canadians. I live in Minneapolis, right? It's weird to have Canadians be like, screw you guys, because they were very polite. I'm like, they're boycotting our whiskey, and trust me, Canadian whiskey sucks. Like, they're still boycotting our whiskey. We're having the EU preparing retaliatory sanctions on their main security partner and trade partner. We're having China preparing retaliatory sanctions on their main trading partner. We are having the Japanese, Koreans, and the Chinese getting together in an economic working group to find some sort of modus vivendi that cuts out the United States. Clearly, we're not seeing a world in which the unilateralist or restrainer predictions are actually coming to fruition. Small countries, Tom Long has this great book from 2022, have many options, particularly in an unsettled international environment. And this is a problem. If the Trump administration of the United States is truly serious about developing new types of economic and political and security relationships, the major issue right now is our credibility and our consistency. It's very easy to lose credibility in international relations. It's very hard to maintain or actually increase it over time. And the US has had a number of different overlapping ways of developing great credibility. Institutions, institutional constraints, reputations, consistency over time. If we want to rebuild things, we in the United States face an enormously difficult credible commitment problem. And I think there's three dimensions to that. First is consistency. So Trump, when he first came back into office, was decrying the economic deals that we had signed with Mexico and Canada. Except that he was, of course, the one who signed those deals. So we have a clear consistency issue of, if you sign a deal with the United States, how do you know that the president is not going to turn around the next day and say, I don't actually want to do that anymore? Especially on something that took a while to negotiate, that was actually, formalized and agreed upon. Even worse is if you have a relatively informal agreement. The UK was right out of the gate getting that first agreement with the United States, but if you read the text very carefully, or even not that carefully, it explicitly says, this is not a legally binding agreement. Not a great stance in terms of helping to shore up our credibility, and also ensuring that the United States gets the economic benefits that it desires. Secondly, assurance versus threats. The US right now is pretty good at sending out threats. But similarly to the above, to the consistency issue, can we assure our partners that whatever they sign, they will actually receive? What is the structure of benefits within the agreement? If it's short-term, the United States gets, long-term, the United States gives, that's really risky for partner countries who now have to think like, well, will I actually be around? Will I actually be there to receive these long-term benefits? Or am I just giving something in the absence of any sort of credible assurance that I will get something in return? The last factor, I think, is security versus trade. Since at least World War II, the United States has disassociated security from trade. And there are a number, I think, very good reasons why we want to do that. One, again, live in Minneapolis, former senator, or I guess the late Senator Paul Wellstone has a phrase, we all do better when we all do better. Like, kind of trite. Thank you for not just like repeating something in similar words, but the exact same words. But the idea is here that when our allies and partners do better economically, that actually is a benefit to the United States. We can draw upon a wider network of capabilities and support for any initiatives that we want to take. And if we are willing to, if we in the United States turn our back on that, to say, you know what, no, we're going to leverage your security dependency on us in order to get a better economic relationship for us. One, I feel like that's corrosive to the underlying foundations of that security relationship. And two, it's, again, a short-term, long-term trade-off. We're getting a short-term benefit, except that our partners and allies will start long-term or medium-term looking for other partners to offset our newly lack of credibility or damaged credibility. So that's in the big picture. What does this mean for Taiwan? I think the one major takeaway I would say is this. Right now, a lot of people are focusing on what can Taiwan give to the United States to ensure the stability of the relationship. Is it $165 billion of TSMC investment? Let's make it 200. Is it $15 billion of arms sales? Is it more fabs in Arizona? What can Taiwan give? My view is actually the opposite. If the issue right now is American credibility, then the Taiwanese need to be concerned about US assurances. How do you make sure you get what has been agreed to, especially within the security realm? In my conversations with Taiwanese representatives here, as well as in Taiwan, I often pose this question to them. What is better from the United States' perspective than getting $100 million and producing some weapons and giving it to the Taiwanese? Getting $100 million, producing those weapons, and not giving it to the Taiwanese because you don't have to anymore. Or you've cut another deal. Either way, this long-term, short-term trade-off exacerbated by the inconsistency of our foreign policies, or of the commitments we've made in the past, and the linking of security and trade issues means that while people who care about Taiwan should be focused on what Taiwan can give, the real question that I think is going to stymie cooperation is, what assurances can the United States give that it's going to fulfill its end of the bargain? Not being bothered. So there we go.
Good afternoon. Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. It's absolute honor, and I'm just overwhelmed with emotions to be back in this room. I study political psychology, so I would like to challenge you maybe for the next 8 minutes to try to think from a slightly different perspective. Let me pull up my cheat sheet. Okay, so when we talk about the political psychology of US-Taiwan relations, I'd like to highlight that 2 events loom large on Taiwanese minds when it comes to IR in general, and including, and I would say in particular, US-Taiwan relations. The first is the Hong Kong protests that took place in 2014 and 2019. So that's reality check number 1. To a lot of people, perhaps you'll recall the projection that people had reflected in the narrative Hong Kong today, Taiwan tomorrow, right? So at the policy level, which I believe perhaps most of you in this room are most concerned about, it signaled the end of the one country, two system, period, right? Today, if you mention that, people just kind of laugh, right? Absolutely, no market at all, right? That's cognition, right? That's cognitive, right? It reinforced China's skepticism in a lot of minds of Taiwanese. Okay, emotionally, also people felt anxious on seeing what happened in Hong Kong. Obviously, angry, threatened. It definitely pushed Taiwan further away psychologically from the mainland, right? With all the events unfolding, and a lot of people also feel disillusioned, seeing the way that the CCP government treated Hong Kong, and also on the other hand, I would also argue the international response, right? I mean, we could argue the world pretty much just kind of stood by what happened in Hong Kong, right? So that loomed large, definitely, on the minds of Taiwanese. The second event is the ongoing Ukraine war, right? So reality check number 2, right? Again, right, almost a decade later, we are hearing, this narrative, Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow, right? So, at like sort of a more macro level, it highlighted, right, the biggest threat that Taiwan faces, right, existential threat, right, definitely feels like, well, conflict is closer, right, all this politicals, that, but like, like psychologically, right, feels like, well, we have to like really be thinking about this, and a more sort of micro or individual level. Just like a sort of a quick add-on to what I mentioned earlier about existential threat, because as humans, right, we have innate need for security. Right, so whenever, right, we sense that, oh, we have this, sort of existential threat, it's almost sort of inescapable, not to be concerned, right, not to feel threatened, right, and as I mentioned, sort of at a more micro level, more individual level, well, we also have an innate need for certainty, right? If you think back at COVID times, right? Right, not like the happiest time, in our life, and that was because, sure you agree, there was so much uncertainty in the air, right? Novel virus and all that, I won't go into, yeah. But again, that's like cognitive, right? So like, again, if you think back, maybe like in grade school, hopefully not in kindergarten, how did you learn not to punch someone? Right, well, because that's wrong to do, right? And there may be consequences, right, punishment, right? So we know, right, it's not right, you shouldn't invade another country, but it seems like Ukraine is being punished. So wait a sec, right, that something does not look right. We all know there's been quite a lot of fuss, a lot of debate about does Taiwan have the will to fight? I think it almost sort of makes it look seem like a fake issue in a sense. People seeing what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, a lot of people certainly didn't expect it to keep dragging on for so long, right? 3 years later, we're still talking about it. The country is greatly affected on the ground, right? 4 million people flee the country, probably have a generation of including kids, right? Suffering from PTSD and all that, right? Trauma, right? So while they certainly, a lot of people see this, while they demonstrate their will to fight, right? Great national resilience. Tom mentioned that a few of us were at a conference in Taipei just last week. There were a lot of East European attendees, participants at that conference. They all said, oh, like nobody expected Ukraine to have great respect for how the Ukrainians are, withholding their grounds, fighting the Russians and all that. Okay, so that answers your question, right? But look what's happening both on the ground and like to their people, right? And that kind of also, if you will, feeds this, so in contrast to like the China skepticism that I mentioned earlier in regards to Hong Kong, US skepticism, right? Perhaps it then like makes a little more sense, right? And then I just like to mention that when it comes to US Taiwan relations, if you look at all the survey results or the studies or prior research, the perceptions of US in Taiwan, I mean, Taiwanese people have great affinity for the US, no matter what the scale was used. Okay, I can just recall the latest research that I myself did with a few collaborators, right? On a 7-point scale, right? The mean score, the average was above 5.5. That's great, right? Like great affinity, right? And I do believe that overall Taiwanese people feel pretty attached to the US, to the American people. And that's where, right, this fear of abandonment kicks in, right? In psychology, right, that's like a central tenet of attachment theory, right? You feel attached to someone, therefore you're afraid that they might abandon you, right? So if you kind of try to think about it in that context. And again, I'm sure you probably read the Brookings report last month, and earlier Tom circulated the Economist report, right? This whole sort of growth in pessimism and mistrust towards the US, perhaps, is not so confusing, in a sense, a little bit less confusing. And that's all like sort of cognition again, right? So emotionally, right? Taiwanese people definitely feel great empathy towards Ukraine. They can definitely resonate with their desire for autonomy and sovereignty. So again, I think in this room, because we study the subject, so we are a lot more knowledgeable about the geopolitics behind the conflict and all that, which may not be the case for just lay people. But it's not to say that they don't project psychologically, right, to what they're seeing, whether on social media or if they still watch TV and all that, like, read. So I think we can talk about missiles, we can talk about money, but at the end of the day, we are talking about people, right? So hopefully, I we can sort of try to understand this from a slightly different angle, and I'm happy to say questions. A little bit later.
Hello, is this on? I think it is. Right, hey, thank you for Raymond and Bruce Lee and I think you've given us a lot already to think about and talk about once we get to the Q&A, but I also want to talk about people. You're just talking about people, not about missiles, but it's important because when it comes to the relationship between the United States and its allies and partners, including Taiwan, there's a need for confidence there. And one of the ways that this is undermined in the current administration right now, the Trump administration, is the way that they've negatively impacted civil military relations in this country. And what I'm talking about here is a special case, basically, of loss of confidence. But as we've seen, a lot of senior military officials be fired by the Trump administration, a lot of folks in uniform. What effect does that have not only in DC in terms of the confidence that citizens of this country can have in their military, that it's going to be able to do the things it's advertised to do, but also that has effects beyond DC, places like Taiwan, where they're looking for assurance about what the U.S., not only what it can do, but what it will do, what it has the spine, basically the backbone to do. And when we see these negative effects of civil military relations taking place, like in this country right now, with sort of the wanton firing of cashiering of officials, it just really has a bad effect. And so that's basically what I'm going to talk about a little bit more here. Traditionally, civil military relations in this country is seen as something that's adding a lot of ballast and stability to relationships with other countries, allies and partners. You've seen that actually not just in the context of Taiwan, but also a few years ago when there was a lot of tension between the U.S. and China around the time of the U.S. 2020 presidential election. This was one of the things that the relationship between the U.S. and China was the military relationship and the ability for folks on that mill-to-mill relationship to reach out to each other was something that was a source of stability when there's a lot of other lack of stability in other parts of the relationship. So it's not just with Taiwan, it's other countries as well. But because Taiwan is, hoping and counting on the U.S. to be able to do these things to help it potentially if something happens across the strait, if deterrence breaks down, if there's conflict, Taiwan's especially vulnerable to this type of dynamic. And it's nothing new, as I mentioned. This started, I think, really in the post-Vietnam era. In the first Trump administration, we saw a lot of issues with civil military relations in this country at that time. We didn't see things go nearly as far as they have so far in these few months of the second Trump administration, though. We didn't see officials being fired and removed from their positions for what appears to be just political purposes. We do see that now. And what that does is it creates a really chilling effect on all the other generals and admirals that are still serving. It shows them basically that you need to stay in line with what the administration says. You don't have the freedom that you normally would under sort of normal civil military relations to provide what we call best military advice. Now, what you're seeing is folks have to modulate what they think their bosses want to hear. You can't go to them with the bad information, the bad news. And the problem that has with readiness and the ability to carry out the missions that the U.S. military needs to do, including in probably one of the hardest cases that are out there, the Taiwan Strait scenario, I think that's going to have a real problem if we get to the point where we're going beyond just sort of normal, if we escalate into crisis or conflict. This will have a problem not only in being able to deliver the things that we sort of advertise that we can through the military, but then also what type of advice and policy options are being advanced in through places like the Department of Defense and through the National Security Council, or another place that we see a lot of firings and removal of officials there. So what capability do some of these organizations still have then to perform their normal functions of not only defense issues, but then also at the NSC staff to coordinate across the government to provide those sort of integrated policy options and just things for people to think about that maybe are not, shaped by fear and you know, not wanting to come forward because people think they're going to get fired. And then another issue too is that we've seen that a lot of folks here in DC talk a lot about budgets, defense budget, defense spending, that we're going to feel more confident in what Taiwan can do in its own defense if their budget's 2%, 3%, 5%, 10% of GDP spending on defense. But this is a very transactional way to think about it. And I think for the folks in Taiwan, what they're looking for is maybe some first moving action from folks in Washington in the US to say, hey, you know, here's the assurances we can provide to you. And that helps them for the space to move forward on some of the things that we're looking for too. And so there's sort of this cycle of assurance that goes or doesn't go, depending on how civil military relations are going, how governance is going in this country. And so we see now government officials like Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth was recently in Singapore, the Shangri-La dialogues there. He talked about how the threat across the strait could be imminent. This is what he said about it. We haven't really heard that type of language about the threat before. We've heard about these dates, about the potential actions for the PLA 2027, 2035, 2049, all these dates. Now we're hearing this from the US government about a possible imminent threat across the Taiwan Strait. We're hearing from folks and friends in Taiwan that they feel like the threat level is high, but the reassurance level they're getting from the US is low, which creates a very volatile situation. And we see the public confidence of folks in Taiwan dropping as well. There was a Brookings report or poll that came out in April that talked about the confidence level of the US military intervention that dropped from last summer around 50% all the way down to only about a third now. So only in the couple months of having this new administration in office and some of the policies they've taken, we see this big drop off in confidence of people in Taiwan that the US can be counted on for this sort of thing. So that's why I think this issue of the health of civil military relations in this country is so important for specifically the Taiwan issue. It's important for allies and partners around the globe when you think about the US and what it can do for defense agreements and things that we've committed ourselves to. But for Taiwan, I think it's especially important, and that's why I wanted to mention it today. So I don't think this is getting enough attention, basically as a special case of problems that we're having in our own governance here and how they have effects around the world, especially for places like Taiwan. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you so much for, coming today and listening to all of us talk. I think that we're all going to be covering very similar topics. I was looking at my notes and I was like, oh, I don't have to cover this because we already talked about it. But yeah, I think it has been very interesting as someone that does study soft power to think like, oh, now actually I'm a little bit more concerned about US soft power than about Taiwan soft power. And it's been very strange to be in this type of circumstance where we're actually thinking about going the other way. I mean, my family lives in Canada and they're constantly reminding me about what US products are being taken off the shelves over there. So, we definitely see these things, closer to home and also in Taiwan. So yeah, I think some of the points that Raymond, Rosalie, and Garrett already brought up are really great about inconsistent messaging, US skepticism, and then decreases in confidence level. And, I also wanted to mention that US skepticism is also further amplified from disinformation as well. So we have some research at GTI that looks at US skepticism. Actually, our director, John Dodson, who is in the crowd, has written a report on US skepticism as well. So I encourage you to check it out. So, when we look at rising levels of US skepticism in Taiwan, it definitely is very concerning. And that's one of the things that my mind first went to when we're talking about what is concerning us in Taiwan right now. If we look at a study that this is the same Brookings study that we are all citing, but there was surveys done about is the US a trustworthy partner? And from July 2024 to April 2025, the amount of people that said that the US is untrustworthy or very untrustworthy increased from 24% to 27.9%. And then the perception of the US, the people that said it was negative or very negative has increased from 24.2% to 40.5%. It's a massive increase. And what also is very interesting is that KMT voters also view the US as more untrustworthy. So this is a division that happens across party lines. So the DPP, there was 9.7% that said the US was untrustworthy. For KMT, it was 69.2%. And for TPP, it was 47.7%. So I think that it's also very interesting to see how this can break down along party lines. And of course, again, this is amplified through disinformation. The Taiwan organization IORG found in February that anonymous accounts and content farms on TikTok emphasize that Trump will not protect Taiwan and there's chaos in the US. So, US skepticism starts off with this inconsistent messaging, with these seeds of doubt, and then it is grown into an even bigger problem and perception. So I'm hoping to now focus a little bit more on some of the positive sides of what we can do to amend this problem. So how do we regain confidence in the United States? The British Council did a research paper on trust and international relations, and they found that trust can be generated through messaging, exchange, and engagement. So the messaging needs to be consistent, transparent, positive, coherent, and logically anchored. And then also for exchanges, the quality and quantity is very important. And you need to be able to engage with audiences rather than just selling them something. So we don't want just a projection of what the US is. We want to engage with these communities and figure out how can we address common goals, how can we work together. And because of this, I think that US-Taiwan people-to-people interactions and ties are really important for both the Taiwan and the US right now to counter US skepticism that is happening. And of course, there are some challenges that come along with this. There are some disadvantages that come to people engagement. It can be very limited in scope. Taiwan is very far away. It can be very costly to send people to Taiwan. Of course, we always say the best way to get people to fall in love with Taiwan is just to have to go there. But that also can cost about $2,000 in your flight ticket. So it is a little bit difficult to get that funding sometimes. And also people-to-people engagement does not always lead to positive impressions. We often say that truth is the best propaganda, right? But in that, of course, there are negatives. It's not always just a positive representation. You have to allow for there to be some negatives that come through because you want to be authentic and you want to, show people in Taiwan the goods and the bads of US. And it is also, of course, more effective if the impressions that people are getting in Taiwan of the US public are also consistent with government messaging. So there might be some issues in that area. And then also, building off of messaging right now, I think one thing that has happened that's quite concerning to me was the closure of Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, and the reduction of media platforms that can provide information about the US to communities abroad as well. And of course, the dismantling of USAID also decreases opportunities for US and Taiwan to cooperate on foreign aid, although there is still the Global Cooperation Training Framework, which both the US and Taiwan are co-founders of, and Japan, Australia, and Canada are also partners. So there's still some opportunities for the US and Taiwan to work together on foreign aid outside of USAID. So focusing also more on some opportunities for future engagement. One area that has grown quite a lot recently in US-Taiwan ties has been in education. So because of the US-Taiwan Education Initiative, which has supported language learning programs, funding for Fulbright, education exchange, the 2024 Open Door report reported that there was a 6.1 year-on-year increase when it came to Taiwan students in the US. So that is definitely a very positive sign. And this increase also goes the other way. So the number of US students studying in Taiwan has increased from 468 in 2021 to /2022 to 1,685 students in 2022, 2023. which is a 260% change, which is very good. Of course, these levels are still quite low, but it is good to see that there is growth and this can continue to increase. And another area that can be expanded are with the opening of more Taiwan centers for Mandarin learning in the US. They had aimed to open 100 by 2025, but they've only opened 88 as of May 2025. So, we could open some more centers for Mandarin learning in the US to, help more Taiwanese teachers come to the US and learn from Americans. University ties have also been expanding quite a bit, especially in terms of semiconductors and tech cooperation. The Arizona State University has a program called the Taiwan Going Global Initiative, which, of course, focuses on semiconductors, but it's also been a great opportunity for US and Taiwan to learn from each other. There's also been MOUs between the University of Texas and University of Washington with Taiwan partners. Another opportunity has been the International Visiting Leadership Program. So this is a program that the US does to bring current and emerging leaders to the US to build trust and collaboration. Not sure about the current progress of this program, but hopefully it's still going. Ma Ying-jeou and Chen Shui-ben were actually two Taiwan leaders that did participate in this program, were able to come to the US and learn about the US that way. Also, the Taiwan Fellowship Act was meant to create a program, the Taiwan Fellowship Program for US government employees to travel to Taiwan and learn about Taiwan, but it has still not been started. So, having that program up and running would definitely get another opportunity for US Taiwan engagement. And then for further engagement, of course, Taiwan is such a center for NGOs and civil society. So to encourage more international NGOs to set up shop in Taiwan, could also be another way for more interactions outside of the government. And, there also be more collaboration with Taiwanese NGOs and civil society on international platforms and networks. Like just this last February, RightsCon was held in Taiwan to talk about human rights. So it's a great opportunity for Taiwan to be a platform for continuing some of these conversations. So, I guess I'd just like to leave, I don't want to go on too long, but, overall, I think that the problem of the inconsistency of messaging coming from the US government and the closure of messaging platforms does contribute to US skepticism. And this also is further amplified through disinformation and also can be leveraged by CCP actors. So, we want to figure out how we can counter this. And one really great way to do this is through people-to-people ties, through exchanges, through engagement, especially in shared areas of interest that can provide opportunities for Americans and Taiwanese to learn from each other, such as areas of semiconductors and human rights, civil society, etc. So look forward to your questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all our panelists for giving us a lot of food for thought here as we're looking at this question. What is next for US-Taiwan relations? Before we turn it over to the audience, so please start thinking for some questions to ask in a moment. But just one question for the panel, and anyone feel free to chime in. The conversations that the panelists presented just now, I feel has presented a lot on the US side of what are some of the institutional actors at play, some of the governance dynamics that we've seen. So maybe extending a little bit on Rosalie's comments as well, and a part of what Adrian was saying as well. What is the panel's read on domestic discourse in Taiwan about the most urgent issues for Taiwan's government to address in the next 6 months to a year? An event that we hosted earlier this year at the Sigur Center looked specifically at the budget crisis and the constitutional crisis attached since last May, and the kind of the deep domestic political divides in Taiwan may be institutionally manifesting themselves in the executive and legislative UN conflicts. So for anyone who wants to chime in, your thoughts on kind of this question, but focused in on domestic debate in Taiwan, what do you see as some of the most urgent issues being talked about in domestic discourse?
So I think Richard, we mentioned the constitutional crisis, budget fights, for me personally, I worry about that we're seeing increasing gridlock that is going to manifest itself as as kind of increased political polarization and ultimately I think a threat to the resilience of Taiwan's democracy. This is not unusual in presidential systems. We have only to look at here or just all of Latin America to see how these things happen. But my concern right now is that I understand why the DPP, or at least the grassroots, is really pushing for a recall campaign. I understand that the KMT perhaps thought it has no choice, but it really backed itself and the entire Taiwanese political system into a corner where now they are just fundamentally unable to compete with both the grassroots in Taiwan as well as the DPP in Taiwan on the recall campaign. This is a bit of a whole guy kind of thing. But I think my concern is that are we going to start seeing cycles of recalls after every election? The kind of genie's out of the bottle, and so if a party just doesn't like the results, can it force a second election on a whole bunch of people that it doesn't like? Or is every Taiwanese politician now going to have to win essentially 2 elections, and it'll slice off a year of what you're able to get done while you're in office? Potentially, you only have a year because of the design of the recall system to actually get things done. And that's on an individual level. At a party level, if you know that a recall is going to come up or is likely to come up, what incentive do you have to get anything done in that intervening year? Why not just obstruct, hit the recall reset button, and then see what happens at the end of those elections? I think the one factor I think that may suggest that this is not likely to happen, which I'm actually even more concerned about, is the asymmetry between the DPP and the KMT in terms of their party operations organization. The DPP, it's older. It's obviously older now than when I was a kid, but it still has a deep bench within the grassroots, effective party organization, and the KMT knows this. It knows that its ability to compete with the DPP on a grassroots level is just not as high and strong. So maybe the KMT does not want to go out there and start inciting these things, having learned its lesson. Ideally, however, the lesson we'll take is we need to become a stronger party, and I'm not sure I see that happening. I mean, it's a little too early, right? They're focused on the recall campaign. It's too early for those kinds of discussions. But hopefully, let's say come December of this year, after the recall is done, the elections are done, I hope that this is enough of a kick in the pants for the KMT to realize we have to get actually better at this. Conversely, I also hope the DPP doesn't think of this as this is a redo. This is like the easy button that we can press. Whenever it happens, we just hit that button and we can out mobilize the KMT, because I don't think that's very helpful for the stability of democracy either.
I would say that political polarization is also a huge issue of concern when it comes to Taiwan domestic politics. I was mentioning the divide when it comes to disinformation, and I do think that, I do worry that with increasing political polarization, there might not be as much consensus on how to tackle these shared issues for all of Taiwan society and to decrease overall resiliency. In the past, when I was in Taiwan and actually talking to different party members about disinformation, I was really shocked to find that it seemed like some of the KMT actors that we talked to were blaming the DPP for disinformation and saying that, oh, this isn't really an issue that we need to look at. It is just something that the DPP is making up. And so from an outside perspective, I found that very concerning. If the political parties cannot even agree about what sort of challenges or issues that they're facing, then it can be very difficult for them to work together to solve these issues. So yeah, definitely political polarization is very worrying. But again, like Raymond said, this is not something that's just unique to Taiwan. This is an issue that, has hit a lot of different democracies all over the world. And I think I would also mention that another issue that they will have to try to decide how to contend with is there were the recent deportations of Chinese influencers. And there is a legal basis for that. They were inciting an invasion of Taiwan. So there is a justification for this, but at the same time, I think it will be very important for the government to be able to properly communicate that to the Taiwanese citizens and to show that there are reasons why this happens and it isn't just targeting people of PRC background, and that there was a legitimate reason for these to happen, and that this can hold up to scrutiny, if some people wanted to look more closely at it.
Let me offer one thing that's sort of defense adjacent. This group, the U.S. Taiwan Next Gen Working Group, was in Taiwan in 2023. It was not that long after the Ukraine full-scale invasion, 2022, and at that time there was a lot of sort of grassroots things going on, trying to build a more resilient society. Basically, things like Kuma Academy and different efforts to, how do we take some lessons from sort of this grassroots societal defense and resilience things that we're seeing in Ukraine to be successful? How do we translate that to Taiwan? And so I think more recently under President Lai, we've seen things like this whole of society resilience committees and different things where I think it's gone a little bit more mainstream. And so I think those other things are still happening, but there's also, I think, a greater sense of urgency within the Taiwan government that like this is really something that needs continued focus and preparation. So I would offer that as something.
Well, I just have something really quick to add. I guess maybe like going back specifically focusing on US Taiwan relations. And from the US side, okay, so I think that to answer your question, I think the Taiwan side is looking for less ambiguity. Okay, so from the US side, right, I completely understand at the policy level strategically the need to be ambiguous and maybe, the best option, the greatest strategy ever, but from the Taiwanese side, right, and that sort of relates to what has been mentioned here, right, skepticism, right, confidence issue, right, why people consistently need to be reassured because there's so much ambiguity, right, so that's kind of my short
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking on that first question. Now, in the last half hour of this event, I'd like to turn over to our audience for questions. For when you're asking questions, please state your name and affiliation. And let's see if are there any students out there in this summer audience who'd like to perhaps ask a first question? Yes, in the back. Please.
Also, I could just shout it out, right? Oh, hear me, all right?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have mics to give, so please project your voice.
Jeffrey Cole from GW Economics. So this might be a little bit general, but this is the latest news that Trump this morning just tweeted out that he had a phone call with President Xi in China. And I was wondering that, do you think that their phone call will change any kind of a dynamics between Taiwan, US, and China? And can you just briefly comment on this? Thank you. So mostly to Raymond, but the other, to talk about trade, that's okay.
I mean, if I knew more about that, I would probably pay better. Oh, man, that's what's going on here.
They've been in meetings all day, so.
One thing about like, remember Twitter was just 140 characters. We all thought it was too short. Like, this is an essay right here. Thank you. I mean, just off the cuff reaction is that, if this had been Biden, for example, my general feeling is that the institutional constraints within the US-China relationship would tend to hold. Right now, however, because Trump is far more transactional and personally interested, as maybe let alone say so more fixated on personal interests and as well as perhaps national interests. It is, I think, harder to to figure out, like, to gauge what is the fallout of this type of agreement. I personally think that, there are broad structural issues in the US-China relationship that are not going to really be solved by a person-to-person presidential relationship. This is the US and China have been getting closer and closer together, tying themselves together economically, socially for 40, 50 years, however, whatever marker you want to use, right? I don't think that US-China relations can be resolved on like short of a society level resolution. The tensions that we have in our relationship emerge from that social substrate, not necessarily from the personal one. And so the question I have, however, is like, okay, what exactly would a trade agreement with the Chinese actually look like? Does it look like the one that they signed in, what was it, 2018, 2019? A fairly shallow one that broke down very, very quickly. Are we actually going to see substantial realignment of our domestic regulatory systems such that we address trade imbalances? My guess is probably no, especially given how long it takes to sign a trade agreement. So having a conversation with Xi Jinping, sure. But it reminds me of the Kim Jong-un Trump meeting in, was it Vietnam was Hanoi was one, and then there was that they tend to fall apart because the ground level or the lower echelon work hasn't been done yet. That unless you get the up to, like, say, the DAS-D or DAS-S levels, working that problem, making that agreement, and then the two principals come in to kind of finalize it. Unless that groundwork is actually done, it just leaves far too much at the table to try to solve between the two heads of state. It wouldn't surprise me if this is something similar as well.
Maybe comment on the political psychology that this this conversation might have now. Just okay.
I mean, great collaging the two.
Okay, other questions in the audience? Yes, in the middle here.
Nice to my name is Mark. I'm from United Daily News, based in Taiwan. First comment as a Canadian, yes, our whiskey isn't that great.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mix.
Okay, my question actually is a follow-up because there's a call, as all of you know, there's a call in the morning, but the readout is different. From the Trump side, it says it's all about trade. But on Xi's side, it says that they talk about Taiwan, especially the independence movement in Taiwan. So my question is, why do you think there's a difference? Of course, there's no way that we truly know what happened, but why do you think there's a difference? Of course, and also that Trump has been also kind of insensitive on the word using, especially like last time they talked about the Chinese and US market. He used the word unification and peace. Yeah, and why do you think that? Do you think Trump is intentionally doing that, or it just thank you.
Well, I'm not too sure about the details of the call or anything, but I think one thing I would like to note is that, of course, the leaders are going to frame it in the way that their own domestic audiences want to hear it. And so I think that my opinion would be that probably the way that Xi and Trump are framing these phone calls when they do the readout or when they are, talking to, publicizing it, it's all about what they think their domestic audience wants to hear. How can Xi build up his own base? How can he give Chinese citizens what they want to hear? So that would be my opinion, but.
I need to read this thing for a sec.
Other questions? Zoe, yes.
Hey, Zoe Weaver-Lee, formerly East-West Center and Global Taiwan Institute. Thank you all for having this conversation. So my question is actually on, the Chicago Council for World Affairs published that survey that basically said that Americans, 59% oppose putting US forces in a position if China were to invade Taiwan to assist Taiwan, and only 42% favor committing to defend Taiwan from China, even if China was the aggressor in that situation. But on the alternative side, they do favor a US-Taiwan free trade agreement, 62%. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how can the Taiwan and the United States kind of target this issue in particular? It seems to be, it's more of a question of committing US defense, committing spending on US defense. We saw a huge, section of the GOP during the war on Ukraine really harping on this idea about how much the US was spending in Ukraine. How can we approach that issue in particular when it's not necessarily just expanding US-Taiwan ties in general, but more so specifically on the defense and spending side? Thank you.
This is some report indicating that I think only around 30% of Americans know where Taiwan is. I mean, I guess maybe that answers the question. But I guess, well, I hate to say it, but we also know that public opinion can be shaped, right, from top down. So, yeah, I think perhaps not too surprising. This report was released last year, right? Yeah, perhaps not too surprising given the current developments all over. Yeah, I think a lot of education still to be done on the US public regarding this. It's a complicated issue, right? Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think what Rosalie said is completely right about, if people don't know where Taiwan is, they don't know anything about Taiwan. If they only know Taiwan through the idea of, oh, semiconductors are good for us, then maybe that it doesn't, it's not surprising that the economic relationship would be the main focus. But there also have been surveys before that showed that as Americans who knew more about Taiwan were more supportive of military defense. And so I think it is, of course, our interest and our hope that we can, allow people in DC and people all across the US to know more about Taiwan holistically, just beyond semiconductors, and see why Taiwan is worth defending, and how Taiwan can be very important for the US besides just a strategic point on a map, and that Taiwan has a very vibrant civil society, a very amazing society, which is worth defending and is also very in line with US interests as well.
So I think Rosalie and Adrian are absolutely right. I mean, part of the conceit that we have in the United States is that we are all individualists, right? We scan the landscape of evidence and make the decision, and it's our own decision and nobody else's. And political science research finds that that couldn't be further from the case. Typically, we take a lot of leadership cues. Michael Barber and I think it's him actually, did this great study where, oftentimes when you do a study of public opinion, there's a face validity issue. So if I were to say, to test the effects of leaders, if the Democratic presidential candidate says all LGBTQ people are evil and we should ban abortions, you would read that and the average person in the United States would be like, that doesn't make any sense, right? There's bounds on how much you can expect leader effects just because of the ideologies that we have. That didn't hold for Trump, right? The fascinating thing about him is that he's on every side of every single major issue. So what Michael did was to randomize everything he said on trade, on gay rights, on military spending, and said, okay, and you can only do this on the right because it only has face validity on the right. What are the types of people on the right? And I'm sure this extends to the left, but I can only repeat how much he's done. What are the types of groups of subgroups on the right that would be most likely to change their answer based on a difference between what they say and what their political leader says? And he found two groups of the most likely. Evangelicals. Second, ideological conservatives. So the two groups who are most likely to say, I have principles, are the most likely to also flip on those principles if they find themselves in disagreement with their political leader. I have little doubt that this probably holds on the left as well, but it's something to consider as well when we think about these sorts of issues, that we tend to flock as Americans, just like everybody else does in the rest of the world. So what can be done on the sort of interpersonal level? Because if I recall correctly, it's not just that there's a sub-majority level of support for these types of things, but also that compared to previous polls, the amount was actually kind of higher. And we can discuss sampling and question and all question wording, all that. But I think the bigger point that I would like to make is twofold. One, coming with the Russian reinvasion of Ukraine in 2022, Ukrainians living abroad served a critical function in translating what was going on, the experience of that for their local communities. That's something I think the Taiwanese diaspora can do a much more effective job of. And I don't just mean the United States, but also in Canada and elsewhere. You know, and some of that stuff has to happen. It would be better if it happens sooner rather than later. In that, if a war breaks out and people are going, Taiwanese Americans, Taiwanese Canadians, wherever, are going around and saying, hey, this is what I think about this, it's almost too late. Having those connections to your local communities now, having talking points, and so so when you think about, say, GTI or FAPA, other organizations, having those talking points ready to go and disseminated so people can actually write their own op-eds, have an evidentiary basis for what they're saying. That kind of person-to-person advocacy can be extremely important. We saw it was important in Ukraine. I would imagine it would be similarly important when vis-a-vis Taiwan. The other thing is I don't have a really good answer for why I think this has happened, but the GOP's turn on Russia and Ukraine, that kind of, Reagan would look at the GOP right now and be like, I'm sorry, who do you support? The Russians? And preventing Taiwan from being sucked into that. Now, some of this I think has to do with Trump's first impeachment, with the beautiful phone call with Zelensky, sure. But I think that just emphasizes how tricky this can be. What if Trump decides to have a phone call with Lai Ching-te? Does President Lai say no? That would be insane for him not to do that. But what would be the ask? And then how do politicos, how do people here in the United States prevent Taiwan from sliding into a polarized issue such that you can have a fairly significant portion of the US population kind of turning on it? As opposed to the bipartisan consensus, the general consensus that we see right now in favor of supporting Taiwan.
Great. More questions? Yes, in the back.
Hey, Rosie Levine with the U.S. China Education Trust. I want to bring up the idea of trust, which was raised on the panel. I think my assessment at least, it's a kind of an acute crisis of trust in the trilateral relationship. China does not trust Lai and those of Taiwan don't necessarily trust the United States right now, and there's questions about U.S.'s commitment. U.S.-China relationship is obviously not in a great place given the economic tensions and trade war, which I think leads to a lot of the potential ways to de-escalate, not being traditionally ways we would de-escalate the relationship between those three parties not being in place. What recommendations would you all give to leaders in Beijing, Taiwan, and here in Washington about rebuilding trust or de-escalation given the current political dynamics between the three? Thanks.
Give me a second on that, actually.
Well, my recommendations would be, I think, mostly what I also said in my earlier comments about how I think that, educational exchanges and more people-to-people engagement is very important. I don't really feel like, I feel like there's not really a substitution for just seeing someone face-to-face and talking to them face-to-face. So, I mean, of course, unfortunately, a lot of opportunities for Taiwan come out of, rising tensions between US and China. And that really is such a shame because I think that at the same time, that does lead to higher levels of distrust and, it's great that language learning in Chinese has moved from China to Taiwan for Taiwanese people. But at the same time, what about, these generations of people that are not having this engagement with China, are not able to see China firsthand and don't understand, that Chinese people might not see things the same way that the CCP sees things. So I really think that, just having people-to-people engagement is really the most important. And, we were talking about Straight Talk earlier. I think that is another great dialogue, a platform for dialogue between people from China, Taiwan, and the US to talk about these issues and to think about, well, what is most important to me in a cross-strait relations conflict? And it can be really surprising to see that, well, a lot of us want the same things. We just want peace and security. We just want to be safe. We want to be able to feel like we can believe in our future. So I think just bringing it down to these very basic levels of understanding and humanity is very important.
If I could quickly follow up to what Adrian completely agree, right? It's hard for us to trust someone we don't know, right? So definitely enhancing mutual understanding, I think, on all three sides, because that was your question, right? Certainly cannot hurt, let's just say that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess I would ask, what type of trust and what domains are we thinking about? If it's a matter of interpersonal trust, to some extent, or if it's like government to governmental trust, then I think two issues on the US side. One is staffing. We don't have many of the senior leadership or even like the third, fourth echelons in seats yet. It's actually kind of taking a little longer than I had hoped. And I think compounding that issue is the gutting of much of the US bureaucracy, so that even if you have a meat in the seat, what's that person gonna do? I think about poor Ivan Kennebathy. Like, he's a great guy. And like all of a sudden, like it's just him managing Asia, which I'm sure is a very small place for the entire NSC. Nothing's going on. It'll be fun. So even as we get deputy assistants into the various seats, assistants, undersecretaries, who's actually going to execute and carry out for them, I think is an important issue. The other one is, as I alluded to earlier, our policy consistency. How do we carry through with the agreements that we make? And unfortunately, I think that whereas the staffing issue is one that we can solve not relatively easily, but easily, the consistency thing is a harder one, because that's the thing that's going forward. We only get to demonstrate that if by doing something and then continue to do something over and over and over and over again. And so some of that is, we can help some of that by imposing institutional constraints. So for example, instead of using executive orders, we have, I don't know, pass actual laws. That'd be kind of cool. And that would actually do a lot more to provide an institutional mechanism to lock in the credibility of whatever commitment we're making. I would say, some perhaps easy low-hanging fruits in terms of building trust. Rubio's, are they tweets? Are they truths? Whatever they are, I don't know where he said about Chinese visas. I mean, I think that is utterly the wrong approach. We want to build trust not just with the Chinese government, but also Chinese people. And so, I've said this to DHS twice in the last 2 years, that if you want to get Chinese Americans and Chinese living here in the United States to trust you, then you have to protect Chinese Americans and Chinese here in the United States. They have to know that they have an ally they can turn to. Otherwise, it's just much, much, much easier for them to go talk to the United Front when they come knocking on the door, or just say, look, I don't have, just even leaving outside the United Front, I don't know if I can trust you and the FBI to protect me if I give you information. Short of that, I mean, then we're just kind of sunk. We're leaving one of our best assets, which is the US's openness, our ability to engage our own communities to understand the rest of the world, and just leaving that on the table when it should be an asset for us. We're turning into a liability.
Just one more real quick rejoinder on that. I think these are some great points that were brought up, but I just wanted to add one to the bin from my own experience. It was mentioned in my bio that I studied in Taiwan for graduate school. This was sort of a small overseas study program that's offered to U.S. military officers. It's not just Taiwan, it's everywhere, basically. And at that time, 2009 to 2011, when I did it, it also was China. We had folks that were going to Beijing and Shanghai, and That ended as the US-China bilateral relationship worsened kind of during the first Trump administration and COVID and all that. So the folks that we used to have going to study at Tsinghua or Fudan or wherever, those folks now are in Taiwan, which is great for them and for Taiwan, but it also creates somewhat of a strategic blind spot for the US government and the military because we don't have folks going into China to understand what it is. And so then on the other end of the pipeline, then you have the junior folks going to do that sort of thing. You don't have those folks moving up into the positions of responsibility and trust as generals and admirals and senior executives in the government who have that understanding of tactile, having been there and met and understand the people from doing that. And it's really the same kind of things that have been discussed already, but specifically for US government, sort of to not have these opportunities because of the deterioration of the bilateral relationship, I think is bad. So I would say to help increase trust, start sending those people back to China, find a way to do it. I mean, it did happen 10, 15 years ago. It can happen again. And these are small numbers of folks, but I think over time, they create a large sort of a strategic impact. They can, if they, are in the right places later on, and just have that knowledge and understanding that, we're not going to have that 10, 20 years from now because we stopped sending folks to those sort of things.
A quick anecdote on that. My father-in-law is a retired one-star general in the Bangladeshi army. And he did a year I met at Leavenworth and a year at Sandhurst. And, he called it the best year of his life, the best 2 years of his life. It's why he's a good Muslim man. He eats pork, also loves whiskey too. So I think that's not okay. It's like, yeah, it's fine. But he, because of that, is on a WhatsApp chat group with the Pakistani Air Force Chief of Staff. And I'm like, has anyone ever contacted you guys again from the US government? He's like, no. The amount of soft power or disinformation we could develop from that kind of a network is phenomenal. And, especially if we're not sending anybody there or inviting people over, it just makes it's just such a waste and a loss.
Not to hijack the mic very quickly, but yeah, I do think it's such a wasted soft power opportunity. I mean, I heard that Xi Jinping's daughter was studying at Harvard University. Why are we not bragging about this? We should be saying, wow, look how great US universities are. But yet we're revoking visas for Chinese students. It is such a wasted opportunity for us to promote ourselves in the international space.
Great. Well, I think we have time for just one last question. If someone in the audience has something here. Yes, please, Reese.
Reese Bro. I'm currently a foreign policy fellow in the House of Representatives. I'm a recent graduate from Elliott with a master's. My question mostly towards you, Raymond. This schizophrenic and at times self-defeating US foreign policy, in my opinion, what effects on the Asian order do you think it'll have in 5, 10, 20 years down the road? In terms of credibility, I guess, how long will it take to rebuild that credibility, if ever? Thanks.
Jesus. You're training well here, guys. Look, I think part of the issue is that the US generally, this is not, the current administration is not new. Asia has been dealing with these dynamics before. I do think it's new in the sense that the magnitude, the willingness to kind of shock on blast everybody. Okay, cool. That's new. But I'm reminded of the TPP, and it was former Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong who said, look, you in the US, if you're not going to sign on to this is your credibility at stake. And the point he was trying to make is look, you say that you're pivoting to Asia. You say you take the security of our region seriously. You can't even do trade. What assurance does Asia have that you'll actually put bodies on the line? And now, granted, you don't want to put bodies on the line, but if you can't even do that, and this is going back to the comment about the Chicago Council's public opinion polling, it's not surprising to me that you get a majority of people who favor a free trade agreement. Trade is win-win. It's easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy, but you're like your Santa Claus, right? You get a free thing, you get a cheaper thing, you get an iPhone. Fine, right? The harder question is when you're making the security to economic trade-off, or when the economics become tied into your security reputation. And if you're unwilling to do something like TPP, and we kind of see that right now, right? We're not really willing to engage on economics. Asia has even less trust that we will engage on security issues. You know, in terms of how do you start rebuilding that trust, which I think has been a common theme. Yeah. If we can start rebuilding some of the institutions, right? If any of you have read John Eckenberger's work, he was a mentor of mine. I don't fully agree with his work, but I tend to think that his framework about international order is really, really well taken. We have a choice available to us, and this is actually dipping into my Stanford book. One, we can rebuild the international institutions that we established in post-World War II. A really dense, integrative, overlapping network of economic, political, and social networks amongst allies and partners, as well as opening a door for non-allies and partners to join. That's one approach. I don't have high hopes for it, but I think it is a more effective approach. There is an alternative to go to the realpolitik Bismarckian systems that we saw in the late 19th and then to early 20th century. This is perhaps we might label this like a Kissingerian approach, right? It's credibility, but it's short-term transactional credibility. So we sacrifice the diffuse network benefits that we might gain from integrative system, and we kind of leverage that in order to gain short-term sharp benefits for ourselves. I think the reason why I'm hesitant to even recommend that as an option is that we need only look at the history of that time to see what happens, right? There is this belief in the transactional approach to foreign policy that, look, I don't have any commitments. I can do whatever I want. If I'm powerful, especially if I'm powerful, I can kind of maneuver around things. But that's the short term. The long term is states tend not to trust you. You cannot commit to long-term agreements. The fact that you don't have integrative economic or security institutions means that other countries can kind of spiral off and go do their own thing, which might redound back to your cost. And then lastly, I think the policy latitude and freedom we think we buy from a transactional approach tends to fall fairly quickly. World War I occurred because we had locked in blocks of countries that just hated each other. And while the whole system was founded on the idea you can be fluid and moving, eventually social forces push you towards locked in blocks. And you're kind of where we are now. We could say like, oh, you've got a China block, yeah, US block, you got maybe a Russian block, but you don't have the integrative connective tissue between all those, the members of those blocks. So you have less influence over their policy, you have less benefit from economic and social exchange, and you're left more exposed to something random like an archduke being killed in Austria. Yeah, thank you. And that somehow spills over in a way that you don't have an institution that can actually capture and monitor and resolve.
I totally agree with you. Devil's advocate, though, it seems this bifurcation of economics and security, after all, we killed TPP in 2016, 2017, has actually improved our security position in Asia. It seems the Trump administration's back and forth policy might undermine that, but what are your thoughts on the idea that it's possible to bifurcate trade and security?
I think
given the history.
It's a danger to assume that it's our trade policy it's a good question, but it's our trade policy that's driving the increased security posture in the region. So I think the big example is Russia and the EU, right? You're seeing, in advance of well, I guess after 2014 in Crimea, after the invasion in Georgia in 2008, defense spending went up. And in my view, it was not due to any US pressure saying, you guys must spend X percentage of GDP on your defense. If you look at France and Germany, they didn't really do that much. I mean, they did a little bit because they were selling weapons, but it was the countries right along the border with Russia that were increasing their defense spending, New Europe in George W. Bush's terms. Well, why did they do that? It's not necessarily because of US pressure, it's because of the fact that Russia was a threat. I would imagine, I actually think the same thing happens in Asia. It's, while, our trade or our push for economic leverage maybe had an impact, it's more about the rising China threat, about, what China does in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, vis-a-vis demonstrations towards Taiwan, wolf warrior diplomacy. that in my mind, I feel like we ask people, that would be the real driver as opposed to what the US decides to do. And, I think one issue with trade is that it's a latent effect, whether or not you have a trade agreement or institutions, that kind of thing. It's hard to know the price you would have paid had a trade agreement gone into, let me ask a question. How much do you think the average American saves because of free trade with China a year?
$8,000.
Okay, that's too high. About 800, well, this was about 20 years ago, so about $800. I would imagine with inflation, or yeah, I know that 8,000, that's a lot. But it's quite a high amount, right? And the problem is we never think about it in those terms, right? If I were to just go to the average American and say, hey, you're $800 richer today than you were, or you're $800 poorer than you were now than you were yesterday, they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? I have no idea. And so it is difficult with those kind of latent dynamics to really understand, like, okay, is this actually pushing the security conversation, or is it something? But no, great questions.
Thanks.
A testament to GW's education.
Great. Well, I think this panel covered a lot of excellent issues here. It seems like trust, credibility, and human connections seem to be some of the most urgent issues in US-Taiwan relations that we can hopefully address collectively here today. But thank you all for joining us for this panel. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. And we hope to see you at more GW events like this in the near future. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
No, okay.